Appreciate you being part of the stream here on Birds 365. Mac and Mac with Luke Easterling from Athlon Sports, who I've had the pleasure of having on my CBS show. Nice to see his smiling face. I had no idea what Luke looked like. And he'd probably go, holy Mac, who's this gray beard I'm on with right now?
Two gray beards. Yeah.
Luke, appreciate you jumping in. Thanks much. No, this is a busy time for you this time of year as a draft analyst, and we're getting that much closer to the draft. It's the misinformation season. It's the flat out lying season. How do you determine who's telling the truth, who's lying, what to believe, what not to believe? I've been doing this a long time, like you have as well. It just annoys me. It frustrates me. I get it. It's part of the game. But have you had any secrets, any things you've learned over the year? All right, this is how you know somebody's lying. Because a lot of times you're just getting something on the phone or something like you get look in somebody's eyes and go, oh, I can tell that's a stone cold friggin' lie right to my face. How do you know when they're telling you the truth or not with information leading up to the draft?
I think it's just like I told you the other night, Jody. You just never believe anything. That's the way you have to. If that's your baseline, right? You got to stick with that and just let it all play out. I think this is the point in the process. You guys remember a few years back when they pushed the draft back like 2 weeks, and it was in like the first week of May, and it was even worse because we had like 2 more weeks of this nonsense and this garbage over and over, and everybody was like, okay, we're never doing that again. It was already bad enough, and so I think that. This last few weeks is always the worst, right? Because all the hay's in the barn at this point, right? You've evaluated all the players. You've had the combine and most of the pro days at this point. There's nothing else to do except throw out rumors and try to, again, if you're a team, maybe there's a guy that you're worried isn't going to get to you, and maybe you throw some things out there that might encourage teams to avoid that player, so you get a chance to get him without trading up. So at this point, I caution everybody in terms of the rumors. Just focus on the players. Focus on what your team needs. Focus on what the players, bring to the table. If anybody says, hey, this crazy thing is out there and this team's going to do this, I'm telling you, man, like if information is getting out there, it's because somebody wanted it to. Mm-hmm, if somebody wanted it to, it's probably not the truth.
Yeah. To Jody's point, how do you know? If somebody opens their mouth, because they're doing it for a reason. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and to a certain degree, that point, Luke, I've always hated the terms rising and falling that you often see in the media, and I've been guilty of it. We all have over the years, but if somebody is rising and falling, it's because we found out about them. It's not because they're rising and falling in the building. It's not like somebody wakes up one day and goes, oh, we just found this kid.
Right.
So that part I always hate, but we'll start with, I guess, Washington at number 2 overall, because that's where the draft starts, right? We know Chicago is going to take Caleb Williams. So you have your pick of the quarterbacks at number 2 overall. What's your favorite flavor for the Washington Commanders?
I mean, my favorite is Jaden Daniels, and for a couple of reasons. I think first of all, McCarthy's not even in that conversation for me. I think I have Michael Penix Jr. ahead of J.J. McCarthy just in terms of a general, my rankings, which are more of a, most of us in the media, we do this in a very general, big picture sense. It's very different than what each individual team does in the way they stack their boards. But, J.J. McCarthy is the 5th best quarterback in this draft to me. I think Michael Penix Jr. is ahead of him. So the conversation for me would be, assuming Williams is gone, it's Jaden Daniels or it's Drake May. And while I think Drake May is probably better from the pocket and he's a good enough athlete to make things happen on the run when he needs to and pick up a few yards when you need him to, I think he's a better athlete than people give him credit for. It's hard for me not to look at Jaden Daniels and see Lamar Jackson all over again.
I'm with you. I said the same thing.
Part of it is
playmaker. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. And not just that, it's the elite game-breaking speed is really what puts him over the top, right? Because if you're comparing them as passers, I think there's similarities between May and Daniels, and it could really be just, which guy did you sit down with at dinner and have a better feel for? That could actually impact it. But with Daniels, we saw the same progression as a passer, particularly from the pocket, particularly when throwing outside the numbers and pushing the ball down the field, which are the hardest things to do and to get better at. Lamar Jackson did the same thing his last year at Louisville, right? He went from a guy who was catch, look for your first read and take off, to a guy who was understanding how to sit in the pocket, how to dissect what was going on, how to make tight window throws over the middle and outside the numbers. He made such a huge progression that last year at Louisville. That's what we saw from Jaden Daniels that last year at LSU, was finally that clicking as a passer that showed I can do this from the pocket. And oh yeah, if I get to the second and third read and nothing's there, I can also run 4-3 and literally outrun the entire defense and eliminate angles and make everybody look stupid. So that's, again, what sets him apart for me. He made the progression as a passer. I'm confident enough in him as a passer, and the speed is just, you can't teach that. That's the kind of stuff that defensive coordinators have nightmares about.
I'll give you my one reservation on Jaden Daniels, and I'll take it back to an Eagles situation 25 years ago. Eagles drafted Bobby Hoying in like the third or fourth round out of Ohio State, and he got into a game in his rookie year and threw for 350 yards. They're ready to build a statue for him down at the vet because he had one game in the middle of it. And I tried to tell everybody, listen, he was really good at Ohio State for a specific reason. He was surrounded by first-round talent. Eddie George, Springer on the offensive wide receivers. Can we wait a little bit and see if he actually can raise other people's levels, or did his teammates raise his? And, of course, Bobby Hoying fell flat on his face. That scares me about Jaden Daniels, because both of his wide receivers are going to go in the first round here. Neighbors might even be like the fifth pick in the draft, and his secondary wide receiver is also going to go in the first round. Do we know that Daniels got that much better, or just, man, he had talent to throw to, and those guys got separation, and a lot of quarterbacks could have put up the numbers past than he did?
I think there's a lot to that, and they'll probably have the same argument about Penix, right? Elite offensive line, had all those weapons around him. Can he do it if he doesn't have that? And I think the biggest thing with Daniels is if you really look at the film and you go down play by play and see what he did on those plays, he made throws that it wouldn't have mattered who it was. You know, he put the ball where it needed to be put, and sure, it helps when you have those guys. But you know, looking at a situation like Washington, they got Terry McLaurin, they got Jahan Dotson, they've got some weapons there that I think would make it a more seamless transition. If he was going to New England, we might have a different conversation about how much time it would take to develop because of the supporting cast. So again, I try to balance that. That's a double-edged sword, Jody, in that you're trying to be like, you know, is it a chicken and the egg thing? You know, what is the quarterback driving this car, or is he a passenger? With at the same time balancing the fact that a guy can't help who he plays with. And if you have, how many times have we seen receivers at the next level who are elite receivers held back because of poor quarterback play, as opposed to a guy on the other side where it's like, okay, I've got these elite receivers and I'm taking full advantage of them because I am talented enough. I am a good enough passer to put the ball where they need to go. You know, Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors weren't ever frustrated with Jaden Daniels as their quarterback. And I think that'll be the same way at the next level.
All right, one last quarterback question, because then we'll get into some Eagles stuff, and the Eagles aren't looking for a quarterback, so I don't want to. But I do want to talk about McCarthy because he's so interesting, and you have him lower, at least some misinformation has the NFL liking him more than most draft experts or whatever you want to call it. And to Jody's point, and to your point, both of them, you have a guy who basically was limited by the offense he was in for whatever reason. And that's a red flag for me, Luke, because I say, if he's that good, why would you want to limit the offense if you got somebody who's that good? But on the other hand, I think Jim Harbaugh's that old school and that hard-headed, so maybe I shouldn't hold it against him. As an evaluator, how do you figure out J.J. McCarthy?
I mean, let's just say I'm glad my job doesn't hinge on whether or not I'm right about that. That's the case every year, right? We always joke about that in the media. It's like, oh, you know, we have the same hit rate as the league does, but we're not going to get fired if we put the wrong quarterback at number 2. So, no, I think with McCarthy, I have the same struggle, right? Where it's just, I think the league, if they like him as much as we're kind of all hearing that they do, it's because they see moments and say, if I need him to do X, Y, or Z, he's proven that this 1 or 2 or 3 times in these moments, he can do that. The problem is trying to extrapolate the exceptions to being the rule after jumping to the next level, right? Because everything's going to get tighter. Everything's going to get harder at the next level. Everybody's better. Everything is faster. Can you look at the moments where he showed the arm talent, or he showed the athleticism, or the decision-making, or the clutch ability to make a big play on a third down, or in a critical moment? Can that become a more regular thing if he's forced into a situation where he doesn't have an elite ground game, he doesn't have an elite defense, he doesn't have all those things that he was able to rely on at Michigan? That's really the problem. We don't have a sample size of him as a volume passer where the offense kind of ran through him and had success, right? He was able to just hand the ball off to two elite running backs. He was able to work off play action and have a lot of separation with his receivers. Just wasn't, I think he threw 22 touchdown passes in 15 games. I mean, that's, again, it's not all about stats, and the league is always going to draft you based on what they think you can become, not what you've done necessarily at the college level. But I think that is the biggest struggle for me is that you see the flashes of ability, you see the talent in spurts, but when you compare it to guys that have had a ton of production and a ton of consistent high-level performance as the focal point of the offense and distributing the ball as a volume point guard, if you will, that's why it's hard for me to confidently say, if I was gonna stand on the table and put my stamp on a guy in this quarterback class, McCarthy just can't be that guy just because we haven't seen enough of him.
Sounds like all three of us look at it the exact same way. All right, like John said, let's get to the Eagles. As of right now, first round, the Eagles have the 22nd pick in the draft. Doesn't mean they're going to pick at 22 because Howie Roseman is famous for moving up, moving down. He's not afraid to shake a move in the first round. But for the purpose of today's conversation, let's stays at 22. There are a couple positions where the Eagles could benefit from having a guy as a first-round draft pick that you would assume could step in and play right away. Cornerback for sure, offensive line, I would say interior. John says swing, start him inside, move him outside at some point, replace Lane Johnson. I understand the philosophy. Or edge rusher, since they let Hassan Reddick go out the door. They have a lot of edge rushers already, but can you have too many edge rushers? We don't think they're going linebacker and or safety. Out of those positions I tossed out there, interior offensive line or swing offensive line, defensive edge rusher, cornerback, which is the deepest? Where are they going to get the best player? If they're sitting there at 22 and those are the three positions they're looking at, who's going to be the best player left on the board? What position lends itself to being that deep that you're going, all right, this is the best player. We have to draft the best available player at one of those three positions.
I think I'd probably say corner, but I think that's a great spot for all three of those positions, I think. And I think part of it is because I think there's a clear gap between like the top four edge guys. Obviously, Dallas Turner will be gone. We assume Jared Verse will be gone. Leatu Latu is kind of the wild card, right? Because, film says he's a dominant player. He's got the injury history from back in his days at Washington, had to medically retire for a little while, and you hope he's not going to have an issue with that. But that's the kind of guy that could stay on the board longer than usual if teams, don't, if he doesn't pass a physical or something like that, he could stay on the board. But I think the guy, and people in Pennsylvania will know, it's Chop Robinson at 22 that I think becomes really intriguing. And part of that is because I think he has such a similar skill set, body type, all of those things to Hassan Reddick, who just went out the door, and even Nolan Smith, who they just spent a first-round pick on. He's that, smaller but elite explosiveness, speed off the edge, great athlete, versatile. He fits that mold that Philly seems to like in terms of their edge guys. So that's the guy I think would intrigue them as the edge guy, because I think after Chop, I think I'd probably wait until day 2 to touch any of the edge guys. But the corner class is going to be interesting because I don't think we get a top 10 corner in this draft. I don't think the first corner comes off the board until outside that range. And then, probably Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo, probably Terrion Arnold from Alabama are off the board. But I wouldn't be surprised if we get into the 20s and guys like Nate Wiggins from Clemson and Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama and even Cooper DeJean from Iowa are all still on the board in that range. And so I think if they want to go corner, I think that's a really great spot to get a guy who could come in and start right away and also have a really high ceiling. Offensive line, John, to your point about, a swing guy who can go guard and go tackle, I think this is a great class to find versatile offensive linemen. There's so many. I think we could have 10 offensive linemen in the first round.
Wow,
10?
10. I'm telling you.
And by the way, Luke, that's why I project, because I know if I have to sit at 22, there's going to be a really good offensive lineman that falls because everybody's not going to pay. And there's so many of them. There's so
Yeah,
many.
there
That's
is. And again, the versatility is what intrigues me, because there's so many guys that can play guard and tackle. There's so many guys that can play center and guard. Graham Barton from Duke can play every position. He can play all five. So regardless of what you need, Troy Faltanu from Washington played left tackle at Washington. You want to slide him into guard, he can do that for you. Again, so many guys that can play multiple positions, and I think 3 or 4 of them are going to be on the board there at 22. So if they just want to go best player available that's going to improve our offensive line at one of many, multiple positions, I think they're going to find a quality player regardless of where they go if they want to go O-line there.
All right. If the over-under is 8.5 offensive linemen taken in the first round, I'm going under. Luke's going over.
I'm taking over, yeah.
Okay. I do want to ask you about just an overall view of the draft. Howie Roseman's got his track record here in town. It all depends on whether you like Howie, don't like Howie. There are enough misses where you go, Howie's not great at drafting. That's not one of. There are a lot of hits on Howie Roseman's resume, and his overall job as a general manager. They're very good in both John and my opinion. Who's better? Who's the team that you think just gets it year in and year out? They use the draft better than anybody else. If you want to give me a couple teams, go ahead. But I'd really like to know which you think is the best team over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I don't want to go 10 years back, but the last couple of years, maybe 5 years back, is the best team to when it comes to the draft, restocking their roster.
I mean, it feels like cheating, but I feel like the Kansas City Chiefs have absolutely crushed it the last couple of years in terms of getting immediate returns on the first-round picks. Go back and look at the class from a couple of years ago. George Karlaftis, Trent McDuffie, Isaiah Pacheco in the 6th round, Jalen Watson in the 7th round as a corner who came in and had immediate impact. You got middle-round guys over the last few years at linebacker like Willie Gay, Nick Bolton. You got so many players who came in and across the entire draft, again, at round by round by round, you're having guys come in and have an immediate impact and having a huge impact on Super Bowl champion teams. I think they're a team that has figured out and defined what a Kansas City Chief player looks like, much like we used to talk about the Steelers, or even the Ravens, who I think I would still put up there as one of those teams who gets it, understands.
The Ravens,
that's
where I go.
Right. That's a great pick because they've been that way for a long time. And Ozzie Newsome's fingerprints are still all over that organization. Eric DaCosta has done a great job kind of taking the torch from him and continuing the tradition. Again, once you understand, once you have a synergy, if you will, between the philosophy at the top and the coaching staff and the on-field product and the locker room and the culture and the scheme and all those things like Baltimore has had. And again, a lot of that comes down to coaching continuity too, having a guy like John Harbaugh in there for so many years.
Yep.
It becomes like clockwork. You become such a well-oiled machine that when your area scouts go out into their regions in the Southeast and the Northwest and all these things, they have a very clearly defined understanding of what a Baltimore Raven player looks like. And I feel like that makes it almost formulaic on draft weekend where you already know who your guys are and you just take them as they come to you.
Yeah, to piss Eagles fans off a little bit, I'll also throw the Cowboys in the mix because I think Will McClay is the best personnel guy in the business, and nobody knows because Jerry's got such a high profile. But the Cowboys don't sign free agents anymore, but they draft a lot of good players. I think they're in the conversation as well. But Baltimore, to your point, Luke, they are so consistent, and you can never go wrong with Andy Reid. Brett Veach, who was here with the Eagles with Andy Reid. Andy just teaches people the right way. So the Chiefs are a good selection. I like to ask all our draft people, Luke, 2 questions. The first, how many real blue chip players do you have in this draft? Where is that cutoff? And the second, you brought up one with Latu. There's always one guy we think is going to be a first-round pick that ends up not being a first-round pick. And it's usually because of medical reasons.
Yep.
Kool-Aid McKinstry could be in that for me because of his Jones fracture. If you had to predict somebody we all think is going in the first round that isn't, that's one question. The other, how many real blue chip players at the top of the draft do you have?
I think I'd probably agree with you about McKinstry. I think it's as much about the Jones fracture as I love the depth of the cornerback class. And so I think if teams are sitting in the 20s and they're like, man, I really like his film. I like the tools there, but I think I could get a similar player in the second, which I think they probably can with a guy who doesn't have a medical issue or a concern. Maybe they are a little shy to spend the top 25 pick, first round pick on a guy like McKinstry if they know the quality they can get at corner on day 2. Wouldn't be surprised there. I'd be shocked if Latu gets out of there. I feel like he's just too good on film. Pass rushers are just too hard to find. And he's so polished with his hands, his pass rushing plan. He's so prepared for every opponent. I feel like somebody in the teens or 20s is going to just say, like, whatever, I'm just going to take Latu. And again, the medical evaluations for each team are going to play into that. The blue chip players, I think we got 3 quarterbacks and 3 receivers at the top that headline the class. This is a rare draft class, man, where you got 3 quarterbacks, in my opinion, who any other year would be easy number 1 overall picks. I think that of May and Daniels, if this wasn't a Caleb Williams draft. I feel the same way about the receiver class, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is the Caleb Williams of the receivers, where I still think he's the easy best one. But any other class, I mean, Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze from Washington, I'd put in that same conversation. You can kind of interchange those guys. All of those guys in any other class would be the easy wide receiver 1. I would put Brock Bowers in that conversation. So we're at probably 7 now. Again, I don't expect him to go in the top 10 necessarily. Maybe the Jets at 10, just because of the positional value there. But I think as a football player, I think he's one of the top 7 or 8 players in this draft. Everybody after that, I feel like has some questions. Even a guy like Joe Alt, the tackle from Notre Dame, I feel like he could be there. But I feel like he's more finesse than power. He's not as complete of a tackle as I kind of like him to be. He's still 20 years old, so he's got so much time to grow. Obviously, his dad was a Pro Bowl tackle at the NFL level, of course. Dallas Turner, I really like from Alabama, but I think he's still more athlete than football player at this point. I think there's some development there. Ton of upside, but in terms of being a complete player right out of the gate, I think it might take a little bit of time. So those 7 at the top are really the ones I'm the most confident in. It's just such a ridiculous draft for quarterbacks and receivers. But those top 3 in each of those positions are just elite players, I think.
And I like the way that John phrased it as a blue chip player, because it just annoys me when someone says there's only 7 first round grades that they put on guys. There's 32 guys taken in the first round. So you got to have 32 first round grade. Somebody's going to get drafted. So somebody slapped a first round grade on them. I like the blue chip designation better. And if 7's your number, that's a good number. I asked you about the best team. Now I got to go the other direction. Who's the team who screws it up year in and year out? Maybe that we could go a shorter term, maybe just 1 or 2 years rather than have to go. Because if you've been doing it for 10 years, then why the hell are you still in your position? You should be well fired by then. So who's coming into this draft? You go, yeah, I got no faith that they're going to make the right picks.
I don't know that it's a team that I don't have faith in anymore. I'm excited to see them bounce back, but I think the moves that the Raiders made over the last handful of years, the Mike Mayock,
my buddy Mike Mayock, great guy.
And again, we all love Mike. Yeah, we all love Mike, right? I mean, I've been doing this for a long time.
Cleveland Farrell, I'm still shaking my head.
Yeah, nobody who works in my line of work has anything but respect for Mike's work. But again, just the tenure that they had there just seemed like, with him and Gruden and the owner, like there was no, again, complete opposite of what we talked about with Baltimore. No defined, this is what we're looking for. This is, how we're filling needs. And again, the Farrell pick, again, was a huge question mark to me. You had the Damon Arnett pick, which obviously, kind of maybe shows a lack of, background, and there's so many things there that I scratched my head with so many moves in that era. But now, again, the hope, the positive part of that for Raiders fans is you got a whole new front office, whole new coaching staff now with, not last year, but AP's now the guy. He knows it's his room. Seems to be resonating with that locker room, and they seem to be developing a clearer understanding of their culture, a clearer understanding of what they want in that locker room. And I think that definitely brighter days ahead for the Raiders. But man, that was a rough stretch there for 4 or 5 years.
All right, at Luke Easterling, make sure you follow Luke on X. Does a tremendous job there. Athlon Sports, you can read them there. Athlonsports.com. I need a slot corner early on day 3 of the draft, Luke. The Philadelphia Eagles have a big issue at slot corner. I don't want to take them at the top 22, 50, or 53. But I've heard from different draft people that it's deep at corner when it comes to guys who can play inside. Do you agree with that? And there's somebody who you could say, wow, if this kid gets some sound and patient coaching, and Vic Fangio is the new defensive coordinator, nobody does it better than Vic when it comes to teaching, that can hit the ground running and be a slot cornerback in this league.
Yeah, I think it's a great year. Again, the corner class is so deep, and there's so many nickel guys. I think day 2 is going to be full of them. So if you're waiting until day 3, the pickings will be a little bit more slim. But a guy like Chris Abrams-Drain from Missouri is a guy that I really like in the slot. Chow Smith-Wade from Washington State, who had a fantastic Senior Bowl game, had at least 1 pick, I think maybe 2 in that game. So again, guys that are, guys in the slot tend to be smaller, but they also tend to be more physical because they have to be, right? You've got to be shifty in those tight spaces, but you're closer to the line of scrimmage. You've got to be tough. You've got to be able to shed blocks. So a lot of these guys can be smaller. Obviously, I really like Mike Sanders still, but I think he's going to be off the board on day 2. Elijah Jones from Boston College is another guy who's a very versatile guy. He can play inside, outside, and I think normal class, he probably goes day 2, but there's so much depth at the position. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets pushed down a little. DJ James from Auburn is another guy that would make sense, who can play inside and outside. A lot of versatile guys, a lot of guys who can play that nickel spot. I think the college game is getting better at preparing those guys for NFL defenses by valuing that spot. And those are a few names that you could see leak through to the early day 3 range.
Sounds like Johnny's caught between a rock and a hard place in that Eagles pick 50, 53, and then don't go to 120. He doesn't want to use 53. At 120, that's why I'm ready to jump in and get myself a slot corner. And you're telling us there could be a run on him in the 3rd round. That'd be a little late at 120 in the 4th round. But great stuff. Luke, appreciate you coming on with us today. I appreciate you coming on my CBS show a couple times over the last few months. I'm going to try and get you up again before the draft. Thanks for doing it with us today. We'll get you back on again.
My pleasure, fellas. Enjoy the ride.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Luke.
Luke Easterling, Athlon Sports. One of my producers booked them for me, and I said, damn, this guy is great. We got to get him on again. I got to get him on Bird Street 65. So we did. Good dude. Good info. Appreciate him jumping in with us. All right, McMullen McDonald coming back. Only got a couple minutes left. We'll make the most of it by putting a bow on the show.